She was only 15, full of dreams, light, and laughter. He was the boy everyone thought they could trust. But behind the smiles and high school romance, something much darker was brewing. One Thursday afternoon, in a quiet Oregon suburb, the unimaginable happened. 7 gunshots shattered the silence. A mother wounded, a daughter lifeless, and a killer on the run. This wasn't just a teenage breakup. This was obsession, control, and the chilling result of ignored warning signs. What went wrong? Could it have been prevented? Stay with us, because the story of Kaylie Johnson will haunt you long after it ends. It was just another quiet Thursday in Brookhaven, Oregon. The sky was overcast, the air mild, and the neighborhood, as always, peaceful. For 15-year-old Kaylie Johnson, it was the kind of afternoon she cherished. School had let out early, and like most days, her mom, Stephanie, picked her up from Lincoln High. The two chatted on the drive home about Kaylie's upcoming weekend. She had a part-time shift at the local diner, a cheerleading practice, and a softball scrimmage. Just a regular teenage week in a regular American town. Stephanie ran a small photography business out of their home, which gave her the flexibility to be present for pickups, practices, and moments like these. She and Kaylie had a rhythm. They'd come home, kick off their shoes, blast their favorite playlist, and decompress. Sometimes they'd dance. Sometimes they'd talk about school gossip. That Thursday, it was all laughter, music, and mother-daughter bonding. The kind of memory that, in hindsight, takes on the glow of something sacred. They pulled into the driveway just after 2:20 p.m. The garage door creaked open, and as the engine cut, Kaylie jumped out first, already scrolling through her phone. Stephanie followed behind, holding her keys and chatting about dinner plans. The front yard was still. The windows in the neighboring houses were shuttered. Everything looked exactly how it always did. But something, or someone, was watching. Inside, they settled in. Kaylie went to her room to change out of her school clothes and into her uniform for the evening shift. Stephanie went to the master bathroom to dry her hair, the sound of the blow dryer masking everything else. In the background, music thumped softly from the Bluetooth speaker. A pop song. Light. Breezy. The last song Kaylie would ever hear. What no one inside the house knew was that a hooded figure, dressed entirely in black, had entered through the open garage door, silent, calculated, unseen. Across the street, a neighbor's doorbell camera picked up faint movement, a blur of dark fabric, a sudden flash. And then gunshots. 7 sharp cracks echoed through the neighborhood. Stephanie didn't even hear the first one. The whir of the hairdryer drowned out the initial blast. But the scream? That cut through everything. She froze, then ran. She opened her bedroom door and stepped into the hallway, only to come face to face with a boy she knew well. A boy her daughter had once loved. A boy who now stood in their home, holding a handgun, his eyes fixed and full of something darker than rage. She pleaded, "You don't have to do this." His reply was chilling in its certainty. "Yes, I do." He raised the gun and fired. Stephanie stumbled backward, the shot tearing through her wrist. She screamed, turned, and slammed the master bedroom door shut behind her, locking it just in time. The next shot punched through the wood. In those frantic seconds, Stephanie made 2 calls. First, to her husband, Daniel. Then to 911. "I think he shot my daughter," she whispered, her voice shaking with panic. Please send someone." Unbeknownst to her, the attacker had already fled. His mission, at least in his mind, accomplished. Stephanie gathered the strength to leave the bathroom. Despite the pain, despite the fear that he might still be inside, she forced herself to Kaylie's room. What she saw there would haunt her forever. Her daughter lay crumpled on the floor, unmoving. Blood pooled beneath her, staining the carpet. The sparkle in Kaylie's eyes, the one that made every room brighter, was gone. Still bleeding, her arm numb, Stephanie dropped to her knees and began CPR. Moments later, flashing lights lit up the street. The first responders arrived, officers from Brookhaven PD, paramedics, trauma techs. They found Stephanie on the bedroom floor, fighting to save her daughter's life. She'd been shot twice herself, once in the wrist and once in the chest, but refused to stop. She kept pressing, kept breathing for both of them. Paramedics carried Kaylie to the front yard to begin emergency treatment. But by then it was too late. The official report would later list 5 gunshot wounds, 4 to her chest, 1 to her head. A team of surgeons, even if they'd been standing in the room, might not have saved her. Stephanie, though severely wounded, survived. Her love for Kaylie, her instinct as a mother, kept her alive long enough to tell police what she saw, that it was Marcus Foster, her daughter's ex-boyfriend, who pulled the trigger. And yet, in those first moments, as the sirens faded and the street fell back into silence, the only thing that remained was a house full of grief. What had started as an ordinary afternoon was now the worst day of their lives. What could drive a 15-year-old boy to commit such a brutal act? What signs were missed? What warnings ignored? This was no random act of violence. This was planned, calculated, carried out by someone the family trusted. Someone who once sat at their dinner table, laughed in their living room, shared Christmas morning with them. And now, someone they would forever remember, not as a teenager in love, but as a killer. When Marcus Foster first walked into the Johnson household, no one would have guessed what he was capable of. He wasn't just Kaylie's boyfriend, he was charming, athletic, respectful. The kind of boy parents were glad to see their daughter dating. At Lincoln High, Marcus was a rising star, starting quarterback for the football team, solid grades, and talks of a scholarship in the works. The Johnsons thought he had potential. And more than that, he seemed to truly care about Kaylie. Stephanie Johnson, a cautious and observant mother, actually liked him. At first, Marcus made an effort. He stayed for dinner at least twice a week, helped clean up, laughed at Daniel's dad jokes, and never forgot to say thank you. He even went to Mason's Little League games, cheering from the sidelines like a big brother. On Christmas morning, he showed up with a neatly wrapped gift for Kaylie, a silver bracelet, and even brought a present for Stephanie. It was thoughtful, even if it was small. He said all the right things, did all the right things. But beneath the surface, a different story was unfolding. It began subtly. A text here, a call there, then 2 calls, 3, 20. He wanted to talk to Kaylie all the time. And when he wasn't calling, he was texting, or video chatting, or asking why she hadn't replied yet. At first, it felt romantic, like the way young love is supposed to be. Obsessive, passionate, all-consuming. But it quickly turned into something else. Something possessive. Kaylie's friends started to notice that she'd stopped responding to their messages. She was rarely available for hangouts. At cheerleading practice, she was distracted. She'd glance at her phone constantly, even during routines. And if she didn't answer Marcus right away, the messages would pile up fast. Where are you? Why aren't you texting me back? Who are you with? Are you lying to me? At home, Marcus would stay on video call with her, even when she was doing homework, eating dinner, or just lying in bed. Stephanie once walked into Kaylie's room to find her daughter asleep, and the phone still open, Marcus silently watching her sleep on the other end. Stephanie sat Marcus down one evening. Politely, calmly, she told him he needed to give Kaylie some space. That it was important for young people to develop boundaries, even in relationships. He nodded, smiled, said he understood. The next day, the calls kept coming. It wasn't long before rumors began to spread at school. Accusations of Marcus seeing another girl started surfacing. A post on Instagram tagged him with a girl from a nearby school. Kaylie confronted him, but instead of apologizing, Marcus flipped the narrative. He accused Kaylie of cheating, called her names, made vague posts online meant to shame her in front of their peers. The breakup was messy. Private messages turned public. Screenshots were shared. The online drama exploded. But Kaylie wasn't weak. She held her head high, posted vague but firm messages about learning self-respect and cutting off people who don't deserve you. For a moment, it seemed like she was taking control again. That illusion didn't last long. Marcus didn't accept the breakup. Not emotionally, not mentally, and certainly not physically. He started showing up at her classes unannounced, waiting outside her homeroom, blocking her path in the hallway. The final straw came during a lunch period in early January. Marcus demanded to see Kaylie's phone, right in the middle of the crowded cafeteria. When she refused, he grabbed her wrist and shoved her against a wall. It took 2 staff members and the school security officer to separate them. After that, Marcus was suspended. The administration altered both their class schedules, forcing Marcus to stay away from Kaylie completely. One more violation, they warned, and he'd be expelled. He didn't care. Weeks later, he cornered her again, this time outside the library. Security footage caught it all. He was expelled that afternoon. For most students, that would have been the end of it. A hard lesson learned. But not for Marcus Foster. The expulsion triggered something deeper. Rage, entitlement, humiliation. And above all, a loss of control. Without school, sports, or Kaylie, Marcus drifted. His grades collapsed. He lost access to his team, his friends, and the scholarship scouts that had once filled his dreams. He didn't just lose a girlfriend. He lost the version of himself he had built. And he blamed her for it. Back at the Johnson home, Stephanie and Daniel tried to restore a sense of peace. They encouraged Kaylie to stay busy, cheer, school, her job at the diner. They talked to her about changing her routines, being careful on social media. They knew Marcus wasn't handling the breakup well, but they didn't know how bad it really was. Kaylie didn't tell them everything. Like how Marcus kept showing up at her workplace. How he started calling from random phone numbers. How he threatened to post private messages. How she couldn't sleep unless her curtains were closed and her phone was on silent. She didn't want to worry her parents. She didn't want them to think she couldn't handle it. She just wanted to move on. She was trying. She blocked his number. She left her job at the diner and applied for a new one across town. She stopped posting on social media. Her friends helped cover for her, often checking her route home and walking with her between classes. They did what they could, but they were just kids. None of them could have imagined how far Marcus was willing to go. And the scariest part? Neither could Kaylie. Because to her, and to everyone else, Marcus was the boyfriend everyone trusted. The boy who once sat at their table, who said grace on Thanksgiving, who kissed her forehead before dropping her off after a date. They never thought he'd become something else. They never thought he'd become a killer. The signs were there. They weren't subtle, and they certainly weren't fleeting. But somehow, whether out of disbelief, denial, or the false hope that teenagers eventually grow out of it, the red flags were overlooked. After Marcus Foster was expelled from Lincoln High, Kaylie Johnson hoped that would be the end of it. The final, official line in the sand. She thought that, maybe now, he'd understand that things were truly over. But if anything, the expulsion made things worse. Marcus wasn't just angry, he was obsessed. An obsession doesn't let go easily. It started with the calls. At first, Kaylie just blocked his number. But then he began calling from different phones, friends' phones, burner numbers, even landlines. She'd answer an unfamiliar call and hear silence. Or worse, his voice. Sometimes calm. Sometimes apologetic. Other times accusatory and cold. When she stopped answering completely, the stalking began. Neighbors later reported seeing Marcus pacing the sidewalk near the Johnson home on several occasions, especially around 3 p.m., right after Kaylie usually got home from school. He'd walk slowly, pretending to look at his phone or stretch, but his eyes were fixed on the house. One neighbor even recalled seeing him late at night, partially hidden in the tree line of Horizon Park across the street. He was standing still, silent, staring at Kaylie's window. Stephanie Johnson reported these sightings to police more than once. Officers patrolled the area occasionally, but without a concrete threat or evidence of a crime, there was little they could do. After all, how do you arrest someone for standing on a sidewalk? Inside the house, the Johnsons were on edge. Stephanie installed new locks. Daniel mounted a camera over the garage. Kaylie changed her daily routine. But the fear was always there, like static in the background, impossible to shake. And still, Marcus kept trying to worm his way back into Kaylie's life. When Kaylie went out with friends, they had a rule: no posting photos in real time. They didn't tag locations. They avoided geotagging. If someone took a selfie, it was uploaded hours later, only once they were long gone. It felt extreme. But Kaylie had a reason. Because Marcus had started showing up. Once, after Kaylie had dinner with friends at a local pizza place, she walked out to find him standing by a car across the parking lot. He didn't say anything, just stared. It was enough to send her sprinting back inside. She didn't tell her parents about that one. She didn't want them to worry more than they already were. But Stephanie could feel it. Mothers always can. The tension in Kaylie's posture. The half-fake smiles. The quiet moments when her daughter would sit on the couch and stare off into nothing, phone clutched tightly in one hand. The final straw came at Kaylie's part-time job. She had been working at Speedy Suds, a family-run laundromat just 6 blocks from home. It was quiet, easy work, mostly folding and greeting regulars. But it was also usually just her and the hum of machines. And Marcus found out where she worked. He never came inside, but he would wait across the street, just out of sight, watching. Once, the owner of the store, Brian Sanders, noticed Kaylie's hand trembling as she handed back change to a customer. When he asked what was wrong, she broke down in tears. That night, she wrote him a letter. "Brian, thank you for giving me the chance to work here. I really appreciated it. Unfortunately, due to something going on in my personal life, I have to step away. It's not safe for me anymore. Please understand. Brian did more than understand. He was heartbroken. He tried to offer solutions. Let her lock the doors. Block Marcus's number from the business line. But it wasn't enough. Kaylie was terrified that if Marcus couldn't get to her through school or phone, he'd try through work. So she quit. At 15 years old, Kaylie was forced to make adult decisions to protect herself from someone who used to bring her flowers. And still, it wasn't enough. Stephanie and Daniel considered filing a restraining order. But Marcus was a minor, and legally, the process was far more complicated. Police said they needed more evidence, more proof of danger. They didn't have the messages anymore. Kaylie had deleted most of them. They didn't have video footage, at least not yet. It felt like they were stuck in a waiting game, waiting for something worse to happen. Kaylie, for her part, tried to stay strong. She kept up with school, cheer, and a new job across town where no one knew her schedule. Her social media went dark. She stopped responding to almost everyone who wasn't family or her two closest friends. But behind that silence was a girl barely holding it together. In one private message to a friend, she wrote, "He scares me now. Not in the way that he used to yell, but in the way he's quiet, like he's waiting for something. I can feel it." A month before the murder, she began sleeping with her bedroom door locked. 2 weeks later, she moved her dresser in front of the window at night. Just in case. She never said the words out loud, but the fear was there. And still no one could have imagined how far Marcus would go. Because when people talk about domestic violence, they often picture adults. Marriages gone wrong. Partners in their 30s, their 40s. They don't think about teenagers. They don't think about cheerleaders and quarterbacks. But the warning signs are the same. Control. Isolation. Obsession. Escalation. They were all there. Bright red flags flapping in the wind. But in this story, the flags weren't just ignored. They were buried, under good intentions, missed chances, and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd stop. He didn't. By the spring of that year, the situation had become something darker. Something no longer about teenage drama or broken hearts. This was obsession. Full-blown, relentless, and terrifying. Marcus Foster didn't disappear after Kaylie blocked him. In fact, it was as if the rejection only fed his need to be near her. He no longer had school. No football. No social structure. The friends who used to admire him now kept their distance. He was drifting, couch surfing, bouncing between relatives and acquaintances. At 15, Marcus was homeless and angry. Not just angry at his circumstances, but at Kaylie, for what he believed she had taken from him. And when someone like Marcus loses control, they look for someone to blame. In early April, he started appearing outside Kaylie's new job at a bakery on the other side of town. Not often. Just enough to keep her on edge. The staff was friendly, protective even, but Kaylie told no one. She just wanted to feel normal again. Just wanted to pretend she could start over. But Marcus was always 2 steps behind. Then came the surveillance. Neighbors near the Johnsons began noticing a teenage boy lingering around Horizon Park at odd hours. Sometimes midday, sometimes past sunset. Always alone. Always watching. One neighbor captured him on a doorbell camera, hood up, head down, pacing slowly across the sidewalk facing the Johnsons' front windows. When asked by police later why she hadn't reported it, the neighbor said, "I thought maybe he was just sad." But Marcus wasn't mourning. He was preparing. Detectives would later uncover that, in the weeks before the shooting, Marcus had begun searching online for ways to obtain a firearm. He wasn't old enough to legally purchase one, of course, but he knew people who knew people. He started asking around, quietly at first, then more urgently. One friend, Jason, testified later that Marcus had approached him behind the gym after school one day. "I need something," Marcus said. "Like what?" "Heat." "You serious?" "I'm not joking, Jay. I'm gonna do it." Jason thought it was just talk. That kind of talk you hear from angry boys trying to act tough. He shrugged it off. But days later, Marcus showed him a photo. A black handgun sitting on a crumpled t-shirt. His caption, "It's real now." 7 days before the murder, Marcus had a gun. And he wasn't shy about it. He showed it to multiple people. Bragged about it. Told one girl, Desiree, that he was tired of being played. That he was going to end it. She didn't know what to say. She never told anyone. Until it was too late. The night before the murder, Marcus stayed at the home of a girl named Alexis, an older classmate who sometimes let him crash on her couch. He asked her for a ride the next day, said he had some things to handle, near his old neighborhood. Alexis, unaware of what was coming, agreed. The plan was already in motion. At 1 p.m. the next day, Alexis dropped Marcus off a few blocks from the Johnson home. He carried a black backpack, wore a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and white sneakers. An hour later, she would pick him up again, except this time, his shoes were dirty, and his hands were shaking. In those 90 minutes, everything changed. But Marcus had planned every second. He'd stashed a bicycle near the tree line at Horizon Park. Tucked behind thick brush, he changed into an all-black outfit, gloves, face covering, hoodie. Left his backpack and switched out of the hoodie he was seen arriving in. Then he waited. Across the street, he could see the Johnson driveway. At 2:20 p.m., Stephanie's SUV pulled in. The garage door opened. Marcus watched as Kaylie and her mom disappeared into the house. He waited precisely 5 minutes before approaching. A doorbell camera from a house nearby recorded his silhouette moving along the edge of the house, hugging walls, ducking past windows. He slipped into the open garage. In less than 90 seconds, he was inside. Then came the shots. 1. Then silence. Then 6 more, fast and sharp. 7 rounds in total. The doorbell camera recorded faint echoes. Across the street, a dog barked. A neighbor peeked through their blinds. But by the time anyone reacted, Marcus was already gone. He bolted from the house, back across the street, into the trees. He changed back into his gray hoodie and jeans. Left the gloves and the gun behind. Grabbed his backpack. Jumped on the bike. The same doorbell camera recorded him pedaling away. Fast. Sweating. Mouth open in panic. Stephanie's 911 call came in at 3:02 p.m. Marcus was captured on camera, riding past Alexis's house at 3:04. From murder to escape, in less than 4 minutes. Later, when police searched the area, they found a bullet on the sidewalk between the Johnson house and the park, identical to those used in the shooting. They believed Marcus dropped it by accident. A chilling breadcrumb from a teenager acting with adult-level calculation. Everything about his plan screamed cold intent. The clothing swap. The escape route. The surveillance in the weeks prior. He didn't just snap. He prepared. When Alexis picked him up, she knew something was wrong. He was quiet. Nervous. She asked where he'd been. He just said, nowhere. But his shoes were soaked. And his face? Pale. Back at her apartment, he changed clothes again. Washed his hands. Ate dinner like nothing had happened. That night, he took a bus to the outskirts of town, showing up uninvited at the home of a cousin, Ania. He said he needed a place to stay. She let him in. What he said next would unravel everything. Because Marcus didn't just commit murder. He confessed. When Marcus Foster arrived at his cousin Ania's apartment that night, she wasn't expecting him. They weren't close. In fact, they hadn't spoken in months. But here he was, hood up, backpack slung over his shoulder, face pale and sunken, as if he'd been running from something. Or worse, toward it. He didn't say much at first. Just asked if he could stay the night. She let him in, unsure of what else to do. But almost immediately, Ania knew something was wrong. The silence. The twitch in his hands. The way he avoided eye contact. It wasn't just that he looked exhausted. It was that he looked haunted. After some coaxing, Marcus began to talk. Not directly. Not clearly. But enough. He told her he'd been watching the house. That he knew their schedule. That everything was planned. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't even try to justify it. He just admitted it, as if the act had already separated him from the consequences. He said he only intended to shoot Kaylie once. Maybe twice. But once he was inside the house, something snapped. That's the word he used. I couldn't stop. I didn't even feel it. I just did it. Ania froze. She had a young daughter asleep in the next room. A son who would be up for school in the morning. And now her 15-year-old cousin was sitting in her living room, confessing to murder. She didn't call the police that night. She told Marcus he could sleep on the couch, then locked her bedroom door and stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, she made the call. When detectives arrived, they didn't arrest Marcus right away. They wanted to hear from Ania first. They asked her why she called, what she knew, what he had said. At first, she hesitated. Then one of the officers said something that stopped her cold. Imagine it was your daughter, your son, shot in their own home. That was it. That was the moment Ania realized she couldn't protect Marcus. Not from the law. Not from the truth. She told them everything. His confession. The strange calm in his voice. The detail about how he'd changed clothes in the trees. How he'd said he watched Kaylie and her mother walk into the house before making his move. She told them about the gun, about how he ditched his black hoodie, and about the bike. Everything fit. When police arrested Marcus later that day, he didn't resist. He barely spoke. He just stared at the ground, face expressionless, as if whatever had driven him to act had already burned out. But investigators were just getting started. Using Ania's statement, they retraced Marcus's steps, and what they found only strengthened the case against him. Security footage from a nearby house captured Marcus being dropped off at 1:01 p.m. by a Lexus. He was wearing a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and white sneakers. By 2 p.m., another camera showed him riding a bike toward Horizon Park. Same outfit, same backpack. Calm, casual. At 2:23 p.m., the Johnsons pulled into their driveway. At 2:30, a figure dressed all in black approached the house. At 3:04, that same figure, now back in the gray hoodie, rode away. Everything aligned with Marcus's timeline. His outfit changes. His escape plan. Even the detail about the bullet found on the sidewalk, dropped, most likely, while loading the gun before entering the home. But what shocked detectives even more were the digital breadcrumbs. They pulled Marcus's phone records, social media messages, and search history. A week before the murder, he had searched how to shoot someone and not get caught, where to shoot for instant death. Can minors be tried as adults in Oregon? 3 days before, he messaged a friend. She ruined my life. I want to end her. 2 days before, he tried to find her location via her Facebook posts. She hadn't posted, so he checked her tagged photos, her comments, even the likes she left on her friends' pages. The day of the murder, at 11:52 a.m., Marcus texted Desiree again. I'm so mad. You need to do that to her. She didn't respond. Desiree would later testify that he had asked her earlier in the week to do the hit with him, that he had mentioned Kaylie by name, that she knew what he meant, but didn't believe he would go through with it. I should have said something, she told the court. But I didn't. And now she's dead. That single failure, one choice, one missed warning, echoed like a gunshot through every person who knew Kaylie. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in juvenile detention, emotionless. No confession. No apology. His defense attorneys advised him to remain silent. He did. But behind closed doors, investigators had enough. The gun, wrapped in a diaper, was later found in a storm drain, exactly where Marcus told Ania he'd left it. Ballistics matched. So did the fingerprints. The DNA. The casing found under the Johnson's staircase was part of the same batch of ammo he'd shown off in a photo to friends. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Marcus Foster had planned, executed, and tried to get away with murder. But what haunted people most was how young he was. 15 years old. Not old enough to vote. Not old enough to drive. Barely old enough to understand the finality of what he'd done. But old enough to know better. Old enough to watch. To wait. To aim. To fire. 7 times. And in those 7 shots, Marcus didn't just end Kaylie's life. He destroyed his own. The courtroom was silent. Tense. Every seat filled. On one side sat the Johnson family, exhausted, hollowed out, but determined. On the other, the Foster family, wide-eyed, confused, perhaps still hoping this was all some tragic misunderstanding. And in the center of it all sat Marcus Foster. Now 16 years old, dressed in a pressed shirt and tie, his expression unreadable. He looked more like a student headed to debate club than someone on trial for first-degree murder. But the charges were clear. And the evidence? Overwhelming. The state charged him with first-degree intentional homicide for the murder of Kaylie Johnson and attempted first-degree intentional homicide for the shooting of her mother, Stephanie. It wasn't just a case of a minor who'd made a terrible mistake. Prosecutors argued it was premeditated, calculated, and worst of all, cold. Before jury selection even began, the trial had already taken a troubling turn. Investigators monitoring Marcus's jail phone calls discovered something alarming. He had memorized the names of several potential jurors from a posted list at the detention center. He allegedly tried to reach out to people connected to those names, friends of friends, distant family members, attempting to influence their opinions. It was, as the prosecutor described, a direct attack on the integrity of the justice system. That revelation prompted an emergency hearing. Marcus's defense team argued the calls were misunderstood. The prosecution called it tampering. Regardless of intent, the judge was not amused. But the drama didn't end there. During a pretrial hearing, Marcus's mother, Elise Foster, stood up and began shouting from the gallery. No one's quite sure what she said, but the outburst was loud enough that court officers had to physically remove her. She was arrested on the spot and charged with obstructing an officer. It was a chilling contrast. On one side, a mother who had risked her life to save her dying daughter. On the other, a mother who, through grief or denial, refused to believe her son could be capable of such horror. And then, the trial began. The prosecution opened with a timeline, carefully reconstructed from witness testimony, digital evidence, and surveillance footage. They showed how Marcus planned the attack, his online searches, the gun acquisition, the clothing changes, and his detailed stalking of Kaylie's schedule. They called Ania to the stand. Calm but visibly shaken, she recounted Marcus's late-night arrival at her apartment. His eerie confession. The way he said it was done. When asked why she hadn't called the police right away, she answered honestly, "Because I didn't want to believe it was real. I just kept thinking, he's only 15. This can't be happening." Then came Desiree, the girl who received Marcus's disturbing messages just hours before the murder. "He told me he wanted her dead," she said quietly. "Did you believe him?" "No," she replied, tears rising. "But I should have." Stephanie Johnson took the stand last. It was the hardest testimony of the entire trial. She described every moment of that afternoon. The music playing, the laughter, the sudden scream. And then, Marcus. I opened the bedroom door, and there he was, just standing there with the gun. I looked at him and I said, "Please, Marcus, you don't have to do this." And he looked at me and said, "Yes, I do." Her voice cracked. Her hands trembled as she described trying to save her daughter while bleeding from her own wounds. It was like he wasn't even there anymore. Just hollow. The defense tried to chip away at her certainty. Was she sure it was Marcus? Could she have misidentified him in the chaos? But her answer never changed. I knew his face. I knew his voice. I knew his eyes. That was Marcus. No one else. The prosecution rested their case with a chilling statement. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment tragedy. This was a teenage boy who lost control and made a choice, over and over again, to buy a gun, to wait, to pull the trigger, and then to walk away. The defense called no witnesses. Marcus did not testify. They leaned heavily on one idea, doubt. That maybe Marcus had been misidentified. That maybe Ania had misunderstood his confession. That perhaps someone else had committed the crime, and Marcus, already expelled, already angry, was just the most convenient suspect. But the jury didn't buy it. Not after hearing from the assistant principal, Ms. Jill Schwensen, who testified that Marcus's behavior at school had become increasingly disturbing. How he would call every office demanding to speak with her after his expulsion. How she had once feared for her own safety. "I've dealt with hundreds of troubled teens," she said. "But Marcus scared me. Not after seeing the doorbell footage, showing a figure matching his height, weight, and clothing arriving, and leaving the scene within the exact time frame of the murder. Not after learning that the murder weapon had been recovered, wrapped in a diaper, exactly where Marcus said it would be. And not after hearing, in Stephanie Johnson's own words, what happened that day inside her home. So when the jury returned just a few hours later, their verdict surprised no one. Guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. Guilty of attempted first-degree intentional homicide. Marcus Foster didn't flinch. At first. But as the judge read the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, his composure cracked. He tore off his face mask, tears spilling down his cheeks, and sobbed uncontrollably. For the first time, he looked like the teenager he was. But it was far too late for tears. It wasn't just the act that stunned the community. It was what came after. The silence. The absence of remorse. The unnerving calm of a teenager who had done the unthinkable, and didn't seem to care. After the verdict, attention turned to the sentencing hearing. For most convicted murderers, especially minors, this is a moment of reckoning. A time to show remorse. A time for apologies, for tears, for something, anything, that signals humanity still exists within them. But Marcus Foster? He gave the court something else entirely. A cold confession. He didn't take the stand himself. Instead, he had his attorney read a statement he had written by hand in his jail cell. Lined paper. Messy cursive. No edits. Just one version of the truth, his truth. "I want to say I'm sorry for what happened to Kaylie. I know y'all think I'm a monster. But I still love her. I didn't mean for it to go like that. I didn't plan to shoot her 5 times. I lost control. I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm hurting too. I know what I did. But I'm not a killer. I'm still me. I'm still Marcus. The room was frozen. No mention of Stephanie. No ownership of the planning. No acceptance of what really happened. Instead, Marcus painted himself as a victim. A boy pushed too far. Misunderstood. A boy who, in his mind, just snapped. To the Johnson family, the letter was an insult. Stephanie stared ahead, jaw clenched, holding Kaylie's necklace in her palm. Daniel whispered something under his breath, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a curse. Mason, now 12, sat quietly between them, holding his sister's old hoodie like a security blanket. When the judge asked if the family wished to speak, Stephanie stood. Her voice didn't waver. You didn't just shoot her. You waited. You watched. You planned this. You brought a gun into my home. You looked me in the eye, and you pulled the trigger. And now you say you're still you? That you're not a killer? Then who did this, Marcus? Who left my daughter to bleed out on her bedroom floor? There was no answer, because the truth was already laid bare. The prosecution had outlined every step Marcus took, from the online searches about killing to the messages sent just hours before, from the bike hidden in the park to the gun wrapped in a diaper and tossed in a storm drain. This wasn't a boy who lost control. This was a boy who controlled everything, until the moment it all fell apart. Experts testified during sentencing that Marcus exhibited signs of narcissistic tendencies, emotional detachment, and manipulative behavior. One psychologist noted that he showed no measurable empathy in over 6 hours of interviews. He understands what he did. He just doesn't feel it. That coldness was on full display when the jury returned, when the evidence was read aloud, when the photos were shown. Not once did Marcus cry, not during Kaylie's autopsy report, not when Stephanie described doing CPR with a shattered wrist, not even when the judge announced life without parole. He only cried when the sentence became real. Only when his life was taken away. That's what chilled the courtroom to its core. Because this wasn't just about guilt. This was about who Marcus Foster really was. What had lived inside him. What had waited quietly beneath the surface of the charming quarterback, the smiling dinner guest, the good kid. Stephanie said it best. You fooled us. You made us believe you were safe. But you were a storm the whole time. Just waiting to hit. And the damage? It wasn't just to Kaylie. It was to everyone. To her parents, who now lived in a house filled with ghosts. To her brother, who kept her room exactly as it was, just in case. To her friends, who couldn't walk past the park without looking toward the trees. And even to Marcus's own family, who were left grappling with a new truth. That someone they loved could become a killer. Anaya, the cousin who turned him in, testified again during sentencing. I didn't do it because I hate him. I did it because I love him. And loving him meant telling the truth. Even when it broke my heart. Marcus never looked at her. Never thanked her. Never acknowledged her pain. Or her courage. Instead, he sat there. Blank. Hollow. A boy who made a choice and lost everything. When the judge delivered the final sentence, he added words rarely spoken from the bench. You show no regret. No remorse. No humanity. You are, by every definition that matters, dangerous. And with that, Marcus Foster was escorted out of the courtroom. No goodbyes. No second chances. Just the sound of chains clinking as he disappeared behind the heavy steel doors. The jury had spoken. The judge had ruled. Marcus Foster was gone, swallowed by a lifetime sentence without the possibility of parole. The system had done its job. But as Stephanie Johnson sat on her front porch days later, watching the wind shift through the trees across Horizon Park, she didn't feel victorious. There was no closure. No relief. Just silence. And silence, she had come to learn, was worse than grief. In the eyes of the law, justice had been served. The evidence had been overwhelming, the trial fair, and the sentence severe. A premeditated murder, committed in cold blood, punished to the full extent possible. But in the eyes of a mother, a father, a little brother, justice meant very little without the one person it was supposed to protect. Kaylie was still gone. Her room was still untouched. Her cheer uniform still hung in the closet. Her favorite coffee mug, the one with the chipped heart on the handle, still sat in the dishwasher, unwashed since that day. Stephanie couldn't bring herself to move it. Mason had stopped sleeping in his room altogether. Some nights he curled up on the couch. Other nights he lay silently in Kaylie's bed, wrapped in her hoodie, hoping, maybe, that she might walk back in. But she never did. And Marcus? He'd written no apology. He'd sent no letter. The words "I'm sorry" had been handed to the court like a formality. Sterile, meaningless, a legal checkbox. So what now? That's the question everyone asked in the weeks after the sentencing. Teachers, neighbors, reporters, even strangers online who had followed the case from the beginning. What now when the villain is locked away, but the pain remains? For Stephanie and Daniel, it meant showing up every day, living inside the void left behind by their daughter, attending fundraisers in her name, visiting her grave every Sunday, and waking up each morning wondering if they could survive one more day without her laugh, her music, her questions, her chaos, her joy. For Mason, it meant growing up in the shadow of trauma. Therapy sessions instead of soccer games, nightmares instead of sleepovers, and the unbearable knowledge that he was the only child left. And for the town of Brookhaven, it meant facing something far more complicated than just a tragedy. It meant asking hard questions about teen violence, about intervention, about the line between heartbreak and danger. Because Marcus Foster had been, by all accounts, a good kid once. Charming, popular, talented. How had no one seen it coming? The school district faced backlash. Parents accused administrators of ignoring warning signs, of not doing enough after Marcus was suspended the first time or the second. Some called for stricter enforcement of dating violence education. Others demanded more mental health resources. A few, more cynically, said nothing could have prevented it, that Marcus was always going to snap. But Stephanie didn't believe that. He wasn't a monster from birth, she said during a local town hall. He was a child who became a monster because no one stopped him in time. Her words echoed through the auditorium and beyond. The tragedy sparked statewide conversations about protective orders for minors, digital stalking, and how to legally intervene in teen relationships that turn toxic. In some districts, Kaylie's name became part of a new school policy, the Johnson Act, a guideline for early threat assessment in youth dating violence cases. It was something, but was it enough? Not for the Johnsons. Not really. Because for every article published, for every school board meeting held, for every candlelight vigil or charity walk, the outcome remained the same. Kaylie wasn't coming back. She never got to graduate. Never got to go to prom. Never got to travel or fall in love again, or grow into the incredible woman she was already becoming. She died at 15. In her own home. At the hands of someone she once trusted. And that pain, that injustice, no sentence could erase. At Marcus's sentencing, the judge had said, "You are a dangerous and damaged human being." But he also said something else. Something that Stephanie wrote down and kept folded in her wallet. Justice is not about erasing pain. It is about drawing a line. So that even in our grief, we know that evil was seen, named, and held accountable. And in that sense, maybe justice was served. Marcus Foster would never walk free again. He would never hurt another girl. Never stand outside another bedroom window, waiting for the light to turn off. Never blend into a family just to tear it apart from within. But justice isn't always healing. Sometimes it's just the end of the beginning. 5 months after the trial, on what would have been Kaylie's 16th birthday, the Johnsons held a public memorial in the same gymnasium where she used to practice cheer. Her teammates performed one final routine in her honor, this time in silence. No music, no chants, just movement, precision. Pain turned into grace. At the end, Stephanie stepped up to the microphone. She looked out over the sea of faces, students, teachers, friends, even strangers, and said, "We are not here to remember how she died. We are here to remember how she lived, and how we must protect those who are still living. Because in the aftermath of tragedy, sadness is inevitable. But justice? Justice is what you do with the sadness once it arrives." We've now reached the end of Kaylie Johnson's story. But for those who knew and loved her, this ending plays on repeat. Every day. In every quiet room, every empty seat at the dinner table, every picture frame too painful to take down. And for the rest of us, the outsiders looking in, the question becomes, what now? Because this wasn't just a story about murder. It was a story about escalation, about how emotional abuse can build layer by layer until the final act becomes not just possible, but inevitable. About how easy it is to dismiss controlling behavior in teenagers as puppy love or just drama. But when someone says they feel unsafe, we must believe them. When someone blocks a number, they shouldn't have to wonder if that person is still watching from across the street. And when a mother tells the school her daughter is being followed, there must be more than just a polite nod and a change in class schedule. We owe them more. We owe Kaylie more. She wasn't just a victim. She was a sister, a daughter, a teammate, a friend. A 15-year-old girl who had so many plans for her future and had already overcome more than most her age. She deserved a life. She deserved protection. She deserved to be heard when she said no. But Marcus Foster didn't hear her. Or maybe he just didn't care. That's what makes this case so difficult to process. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a break-in. It wasn't some random tragedy we can file under bad luck. This was someone invited into their home. Someone who once held Kaylie's hand on walks, shared inside jokes at the dinner table, opened Christmas presents with her little brother. He was loved. And then he weaponized that love. It's a horrifying reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they charm. Sometimes they wait. So, what do we take away from this? 3 things. First, recognize red flags early. Controlling behavior is not affection. Constant surveillance isn't love. Obsession isn't romance. These are warning signs, no matter the age of the people involved. Second, speak up. If you're a friend, a sibling, a coach, a classmate, don't look away. You might be the one person who says something early enough to make a difference. And if you're a parent, listen. Don't brush off your child's anxiety. Don't underestimate how terrifying it is to be followed, even digitally. Third, advocate. Push for better systems in schools. Better threat assessments. More accessible restraining orders for minors. Digital harassment laws that reflect the way teenagers actually communicate today. Because we can't keep applying outdated tools to modern dangers. Justice isn't just about courtrooms and sentencing. It's about changing what happens next. So that Kaylie Johnson doesn't become just another name on a growing list. So that somewhere, another girl gets to graduate. Another mother doesn't have to call 911 from behind a locked bathroom door. Another father doesn't have to bury his child. And another teenage boy doesn't turn into a killer, because this time, someone stepped in before it was too late. If this story moved you, and you believe more people need to understand the real dangers of obsession and unchecked violence, please consider doing 3 things right now. Backhand index pointing right, like this video. It tells YouTube this content matters. Backhand index pointing right, share it. Someone you know may be facing a similar situation, and this could be the wake-up call they need. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe to our channel, True Crime Uncovered. We bring you real, deeply investigated stories every week. Stories that don't just shock, but teach. And finally, if you or someone you know is in a relationship that feels dangerous, even just emotionally, please reach out. There are resources. There are people who care. You don't have to wait for proof. You don't have to wait for violence. You deserve to feel safe. Now, this is Chris Dalton, and thank you for joining us on this heartbreaking journey. In memory of Kaylie Johnson, forever 15, forever loved, forever missed. We'll see you in the next episode of True Crime Uncovered. Until then, stay safe, stay aware, and stay loud for those who can't be.